This limited edition guitar has two features that keeps it relevant today. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. And with a little bit of luck, I'll be able to add this one to my collection. So far, looks like this case was definitely not stored in a humidity controlled area, so not starting off so good, but let's hope the guitar's nice. Oh my. Guitar looks okay, but what has happened to the interior of this case? It has severely yellowed. Ew. That's bad. Well, that's okay. The show will go on. This just looks like a regular gold top deluxe. You can buy these things brand new today. Check out the 70s Les Paul Deluxe. They're like $2,600 brand new. But no, this one is from the year 2007, and that will become significant here in a second. But what do we know about 07? They were doing the Guitar of the Week series, and look, here's the first feature that makes this unique. It has the classic antique specs. And if you're not familiar, in the 2000s, Gibson liked to do something called the classic antique. All it meant was a traditional standard or classic Les Paul would have single-banded binding around the headstock, and they would add what is associated as like the SG crown to the headstock, done up in mother of pearl. Because typically speaking, a Les Paul standard would not have binding. And honestly, it looks weird the first time you see it, but you kind of grow to love it. But the crown actually does have some historical context. When the Les Paul was first reintroduced in 1968, the first batch of them, due to a typo, actually had the crown inlay. I would love to add an original one of those to my collection. But after a full year of the Les Paul model being back, they introduced something called the Les Paul Deluxe. This is the first year, 1969. They also have an early version that does not have the silkscreen on the headstock. They just utilized it on the truss rod cover. But this was the birth of the Deluxe, and it reigned supreme from 1969 until about 1976. And during that time, it had some really cool limited editions like the Blue Sparkle Top Deluxe. There's also a pretty sweet Rocket Red out there. The 72s are pretty sweet with their Gibson embossed mini humbuckers. But in 1976, the Les Paul Standard with the full-size humbuckers comes out. So every year up until the Deluxe's discontinuation in 1985, the Standard becomes vastly more popular and fewer Deluxe get made. So much so, sometimes in the 80s, you can find some particularly fantastic quilty and flame maple top versions as they were just using up the parts. Also important to note, by 1976, most of them were then made in Nashville, so you get the Nashville bridge like you're seeing here on good old Double Vision, as I call her. But after the Deluxe's discontinuation in 1985, you don't really see them come along too often outside of limited editions. For example, 1991, 6 years after their discontinuation, you get the Hall of Fame series. It's basically just the Gold Deluxe. It has a little decal on the back of the headstock. As far as I'm aware, we don't really see the Deluxe again until its 30th anniversary model in the year 2000. They made them in a couple of different finishes. It was them trying the market. And then, 2005, Pete Townsend, arguably one of the most famous people to wield a Deluxe. Or should we say a modified Deluxe. He got the custom shop reissues of his number 1 and number 9. They later did other runs. But that then brings us to the one we're talking about today, 2007 Guitar of the Week. This was special back then because Deluxes weren't mass-produced. You couldn't readily get one of these if you just stop into your shop, outside of a used or vintage one. So this model was kind of cool. It's got this nice, slightly aged and ambered hue over top of the clear coat. I mean, you can tell, I know this one's aged a little bit over the years as well, but usually with the classic antiques on top of their headstock design, they also just ever so slightly tint that lacquer. Not as much as some other runs within the series. And here it is side by side to my 69. I mean, the color's not exact. I mean, it depends what angle you're looking at it, but it's fairly nice. But Guitar of the Week was launched in 2007. It's when Gibson did 47 limited edition guitars in 1 year. And we talk about all of them in this compilation episode, but I'm slowly trying to piece together the entire set for my collection, as well as just documentation. So by today's standards, this really isn't all that special outside of being a limited edition Guitar of the Week and our classic antique headstock. But I've got to say, straight out of the box, it's got some interesting figuring within our neck. and it's really not that heavy, so it's got that going for it over the 70s models. And it looks like this one even has some case candy, consisting of the original warranty card that was never filled out, a pre-packed checklist, which used to be separate from all that, and our regular owner's manual, combo lock, and truss rod tool. But to learn more about this one, let's go ahead, throw it over onto the Workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs and see, hey, have we been missing something? Inside our Antique Deluxe, it cleaned up pretty nicely, however I found a whole bunch of gremlins. But take a look at our pickup covers now. They're looking nice and clean. I was able to tighten them up because they felt loose within the ring itself. If yours feels a similar way, it's because you need to tighten down this nut. But the backside, surprisingly, keeps the patent number 273842, just like the vintage ones. The same thing is true for our bridge pickup position. However, I was unsuccessful in tightening this leg because I'm not sure what tool are you supposed to use to get that. I suppose you need a small headed one that you can fit right over there, but that's quite specialized. Within the circuit, those read 6.2 k ohms in the bridge. Neck position a little bit less at 6.05, and they play together at 306. But if you're curious about the cavities themselves, what kind of neck tenon do we got? It's a regular short neck tenon. So in many ways, they're really going after a post 1975 deluxe, because we also have the regular Nashville style bridge rather than an ABR1. So it has posts within the body. But when you first open it up, it has this base plate within it, and it utilizes 2 screws to secure it. And then the mini humbucker screws go into the edge. That's why you have those additional circular routes within the body. And you don't need that second one here because you've got the channel route for all of our other wires from the neck pickup and our toggle switch going through. But I do see that it's marked GT for gold top, and I can't quite make out what that's saying. It looks like pad, or maybe it says gold. But then there's like something over here. Maybe you guys can figure it out. But another thing they utilize within the cavity to help keep the pickup stable are these 2 foam blocks on each. These are going on 20 years old. They're starting to not be as good anymore. So I'm going to leave them in there, but I'm going to add some new foam as well. But man, this just seems like such a dumb idea, even back then. They put the foam right over top of the screw, so it's not even going to be an even surface. Of course, that one's going to come undone. But even as old as these are, they still have some pretty good give to them. But if you're curious what these 2 holes are for, Gibson utilizes the same base plate for mini humbuckers as they do P90s. A P90 has 2 screws that set in right there. So if you wanted to put a P90 in this guitar, you could. The only modification you have to make is drilling the guitar in that particular spot. The routes will be exactly the same. As far as our body construction, we still have a maple top that joins onto the mahogany body. You can't super see it in the cavities, but that's about as good as we can get. That ought to do the trick. And after all that, did that stop the neck pickup from wiggling? No. To me, it looks like Gibson routed that a little bit too large from the factory, and that's why it's wiggling like that. I could add some foam there, but does it really affect the guitar? Nah, it's just something I noticed during my inspection here. This is a full disclosure thing just in case I ever sell this guitar. This screw got a little bit mangled up during reinstallation. I don't know why, but that one was really tough to turn, but it's back to where it's supposed to be now. Also important to note that we do have some very fine scratches on our pickups. But moving on from those, we can talk about the bridge and tailpiece a bit more in depth, as it's just your regular Nashville style one. This one is Pingworks branded. That's what the PW stands for. The bridge itself is starting to sag though, so you might want to replace that if you ever wanted to get maximum playability. And the tailpiece was made by the same company, but it is full weight and it has a full casting mark along the entire backside. So if you're trying to identify originality, hope that helps. Now the reason why a bridge ends up collapsing like that is because it has too much downward pressure. But what's interesting, this tailpiece isn't actually completely decked down. However, it seems the neck angle might not be the best on this particular example because the bridge is quite high up. I'll do a full analysis of all that once I get the strings back on. Right over here, I can see some scratches into the top. Somebody was likely using some sort of a setup tool, not paying attention. And I really bring that up because this was sold to me as mint condition, no scratches, no blemishes, perfect. I'm the original owner. It's just been sitting under my bed. Get this, in a climate-controlled environment too. To be fair, it came from Florida. There's a lot of salt in the air, but yeah, not what I was expecting. It was pretty grimy too, but it came back to life after a full polishing. But this right here is why you need to clean your guitar before you ever list it. Do you see this? That is a long impression line, likely a reaction to some sort of a cable that was resting over top of this. That bummed me out so bad. Everything else that I found I was willing to live with, but this impression line has just ruined my entire day. I wasted 2 hours cleaning this thing. Now, thankfully, it's not really noticeable unless you get it in this lighting situation and you have it all nice and polished. It's not a super deep gouge. There's another area right there. Unfortunately, this is fairly common on gold tops and other metallic finishes. Usually what happens is there's a sudden change in temperature, like in a shipping situation, or somebody drops the guitar. 9 times out of 10, that's not actually a crack, that's just finish checking. And judging by the fact that it's not perfectly straight, despite being able to feel it with your nail, I do believe that to only be in the finish. But we can also see we've got internal cracks within our knobs. Not a big deal, but always good to know about. And how do you miss a giant ding over here? That's the pickguard one. I'm okay with that. The rest of the pickguard cleaned up pretty nicely, but it does have some mild scratches to it. And you can see some more finish checking by our hole where it mounts to the top. That ding is caused by the pickguard bracket. It just rests on top of it and usually has that there. But I also took off our poker chip over here for our toggle switch because I wanted to be able to rule out, did the clear coat age due to other factors? But this looks like the original factory finish right here. No aftermarket clear coat aging has affected this. But while we have it here, here's what the poker chip looks like, rhythm and treble with these markings on the back. But now moving on from the body, let's talk about the neck. It's one-piece mahogany with a rosewood fretboard. And oh my goodness, this thing desperately needed a conditioning, but now it just looks fantastic. Nice and rosy again, instead of being super pale. Now, are there some tooling marks on this? Yes, it's not 100% perfect in that department, but our frets shined up beautifully. I just did a mild steel bowl fret polish to them. But I would like to disclose there is some very mild fret wear to this example. Like you're just starting to see the forming of divots. It's not enough to really even need to do anything about it. But again, I believe in full disclosure. Anything that is a blemish, I'd like you to be 100% aware of. Because I know all too well the disappointment of buying guitars that were not described properly. One really good news about this example though, we don't actually have any fret sprout cracks on that. So that kind of lends to his story that it was humidity controlled. It was probably just close to the ocean for all that other stuff. These are acrylic trapezoid inlays, by the way. If you notice, there's some yellowing to them. And this measures a 12-inch fretboard radius with Gibson's version of a 24 3/4 inch scale. And wow, almost 1.72 inches at the nut, 2.09 at the 12th. But pretty skinny, just under 0.8 at first fret neck depth, and 0.89 at the 12th. Now we can move on to the face of the headstock. This had some weird grime all over it, but I was able to get most of it off, and we just have some mild polishing scratches and swirls from that process. But this is what makes this one unique, that single-banded yellowed binding. You just don't find single-bound headstocks in Gibson's lore very often when it comes to solid body electrics. Usually it's something like a Les Paul Custom that has the multi-layers. That's what I'm talking about by banded. You can find single, triple, 5. So if you're looking at this and thinking, wow, that looks really strange outside of just the crown, that's why. It really is a unique spec of these classic antiques. But usually they are classic antiques. The official title of this one was Les Paul Antique Deluxe. So kind of part of that series in a roundabout way, but not exactly. But they're definitely cool now that some time has passed. As far as the Gibson Deluxe Clusen style tuners, it looks like they are also Pingworks branded on the back. And they've got those snot green keys to them. But now our ever so glorious back. It came to life. In this era, you can find a lot of bear claw marks in the mahogany, and it's really cool looking to me. But as far as blemishes that showed up, that's just negligence on the seller's part. He didn't look for those at all. I saw that as soon as they came out of the case. So you got like 2 or 3 right here. Pin-sized dings, not a big deal. I wasn't too bummed out by these, but there's another 2 over here. A slightly larger one back here. Another one over here, as well as some scratches. And a few more scattered throughout the back. Personally, I would call this one, somewhere around an 8 out of 10. because we also have some dings down here. See another small one over here. In my experience, the original owner is one of the worst people to tell you about the true condition of the guitar, because you'll find guys that go, there's no way I did any damage to that. I never ever played it. When it comes to buying a minty one. Now, when you're buying one that was their staged used guitar, those are some of my favorite people to buy it from because they have the stories behind all the nicks and dings. But just in case you didn't believe me that it has a maple top, you can actually see it exposed right here. This model utilizes the thin binding in the cutaway. And you get more of those bear claw streaks I was talking about. Now, as far as the whole neck angle thing, once I got the strings back on and dialed in the action a little bit, I think somebody just had that way too high. I mean, that's about right for a deluxe. I would not want to lower the action anymore. Some might even prefer to raise it just a tad. But to be fair, many Sparkle Top Deluxe that I have owned haven't had the best neck angles either. Now, as far as the electronics, I figured, well, if the rest of the metal's looking pretty shoddy from being by the ocean, I can only imagine the interior electronics, so I gave these things a thorough cleaning. But it's just regular Gibson branded pots. All the solder work looks original to me. We even still have the plastic output jack plate and our original strap buttons in our usual locations. And coming up to our toggle switch cavity, all the usual stuff. But when I first got this, it was like all scratched up in this area. Thankfully, the bulk majority of those were able to come out. However, now when we put our back plate back on, you can see that's pretty scratched. Now, thankfully, that's a really easy part to replace, if you so wanted to, but just take 2 seconds, take a photo of that, put it in your listing, make the buyer happy. I would say Gibson slightly over-routed this back plate back in 07. But another thing that's cool, this appears to be a one-piece body, and it's really light. That's nice, because you got to remember, 2007, that's the first model year that the Les Paul Standard got chambering weight relief. I couldn't find a particular spec sheet on this release. I can tell you it's not chambered, but it probably does have the 9-hole weight relieving because that was just standard at this time. But I could be wrong. It could be solid, which would make it quite special. But no pancake bodies or anything like that. And it is just a one-piece neck. But this neck is beautiful. It had a lot of gunk on it that I was able to clean. And at first it looked like stand rash, but no, it's just some grime. I was able to get that off. And maybe a few mild impressions, but nothing too crazy here was found. But this was an interesting discovery. With the tuners off, we can actually see that there was some additional yellowing going on, but I think I figured out another thing that gives this that aged look. Do you notice this has yellow pore filler? So maybe that's the actual true difference we're seeing. The pore filler has not aged at all underneath the tuners. Gibson did this exact yellow grain fill back in the 80s. It's kind of an acquired taste, but that's the reason why this looks a little bit more antique-like too. But I was looking at some other 07 models. I don't think that was special to the classic antiques, but it is something that gives it a fairly distinct look. If you want to know the color of your pore fill, just look at your serial number. This one dates to 2007, the 53rd day of the year, production number 439. Batch, wow, batch 2. You don't see that too often. They were cranking those guitars out. Holy cow. Usually it's a 0 here for initial batch and they go up to 500. This was nearly the 1,000th neck stamped that day. Number 939. Made in USA. And with our tuners back installed, here's what that's looking like. And while putting those on, I noticed there is a very small scratch right here. Not a huge deal. And then I forgot to mention this earlier. Did you guys notice when I had that off that there's not actually wood completely securing that area? So that's why that screw looks a little bit crooked, because it's not actually securing to anything. This was bad QC in general. Over-routed there, missed the drill-in spot, too big of a neck route. But hey, that's just all part of the game. Underneath blacklight, I was really curious if we would see like a big reaction to the finish there. But no, I don't see it, so it must just be something that impressed the finish a little bit all across the top. The lacquer's actually glowing quite nicely for 20 years old. I don't think I've ever done a blacklight test on an antique one. That's strange. The binding is glowing orange. That's really cool. You got a lot of glowing to the lacquer in general too. But now flipping over to the back, we can see this guy had a clip-on tuner on this for an extended period of time. That has discolored our finish there. And I was curious about the stand situation. Yes, you can see that under black light. It's not too noticeable in regular lighting situations, but I was kind of expecting that since there was a dirt and grime buildup area there. It looks like maybe a little discoloration here. Overall, not too bad. And no major surprises over here on the back. And our edges are also looking pretty nice. But now let's go ahead and find out the weight. One fantastic thing about this example, look at it. 8 pounds, 8.2 ounces. That is great for a Les Paul. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. Mini humbuckers have a good tone if you're in the mood for them. Very telly-like in that middle position. Very bitey in the bridge, but that can be helpful distorted. Certainly some interesting tones, very bright and attacking. Went ahead and cranked up the gain a little bit. I can tell that they're going to be slightly microphonic, but they're not squealing in my current setup. we go. I knew it was coming eventually. But to be fair to the guitar, that takes a lot of gain to get it to do that. Now that we know all about Guitar of the Week number 8, the Les Paul Antique Deluxe, what are my final thoughts? Well, at least the seller was right about one thing. It plays quite nicely, and it sounds good for a deluxe. Let's just say that. Mini humbuckers are not going to be for everybody, but it's just their own characteristic charm. They fell out of fashion for a reason, in my opinion, and they've never really gained their popularity back. But if you're trying to look 70s or idolize one of your heroes like Mike Ness or Pete Townsend, you can't do it in any other way without one of these bad boys. But as far as the model itself, if you have other deluxes, I think it offers something else unique that you can justify owning it in your collection. But I will say, from a playability standpoint, you hardly even notice the headstock at all in your peripheral vision. I mean, yeah, you can still see it a little bit there, and it's like, oh, that's different. But for me, it's all about the weight on this one. It feels so light for a deluxe, and having all the cool wood grain figuring, yeah, it's a shame the seller couldn't disclose a couple of dings, especially the ones running right across the top. But this thing cleaned up beautifully. I think I'll just hold on to it. It's hard enough to find these things minty. So I hope you guys enjoyed checking out my new Guitar of the Week, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next one. Take care.